February 14th, 1947, 6:45 in the morning. Charles Jarrett, 52 years old, stood at the loading door of his bakery in Broadway, Gloucestershire, staring at what used to be a road. The A44 to Snowshill had disappeared under 4.5 metres of snow. Conventional wisdom said wait for the authorities. The Ministry of Transport had suspended all non-essential travel across the Cotswolds. Every council in 3 counties was overwhelmed. Jarrett loaded 47 loaves into his Bedford van anyway. His son Ted, 24, climbed into the passenger seat without a word. They had customers in Snowshill, families, children, people who had not seen fresh bread in 6 days. In the next 4 hours, the Jarretts would punch through drift walls taller than their vehicle, winch themselves out of snow traps 3 times, and deliver bread to a village that had been erased from the map. They would do it again the following week, only to find their route buried deeper than before. This is the story of 2 weeks that rewrote rural emergency response in Britain, involved ex-US Army vehicles, German prisoners of war, and 1,500 tons of snow removed by hand from a single Cotswolds valley. The winter that buried Snowshill began 22 days earlier, January 23, 1947. The first snow fell on the Cotswolds escarpment as Britain entered what would become 55 consecutive days of snowfall. The meteorological charts showed a blocking anticyclone over Scandinavia, forcing Siberian air masses southwest across the North Sea. Surface temperatures dropped to -21 Celsius in some inland areas. The Cotswolds, rising to 330 metres at their highest points, became a trap for moisture-laden air. Snowshill sat in a natural bowl 244 metres above sea level. Population, 167 people. 1 pub, 1 church, no telephone exchange. The nearest doctor in Broadway, 4.8 kilometres northeast. The village economy ran on sheep farming and light agriculture. Most families heated with coal delivered monthly from Evesham. Most families had enough coal for 3 weeks when the snow started. By February 10th, Snowshill had been invisible from the air for 2 weeks. The drifts formed in patterns dictated by the Cotswold topology. Wind funneled through the valleys, picking up snow and depositing it in walls across every road. The A44 between Broadway and Snowshill ran through a natural wind corridor. Drifts built to 3 metres in the first week, then 4, then higher. The snow compressed under its own weight. The top layers were powder, the bottom layers were ice. Charles Jarrett knew the road like his own kitchen. He had driven it 6 days a week for 14 years. He knew every turn, every gradient, every place where ice formed in normal winters. This was not a normal winter. His Bedford van carried chains on all 4 wheels. He had loaded extra weight in the back, shovels, rope, a winch salvaged from a farm tractor, wooden planks, a thermos of tea. Ted brought a compass, which Jarrett thought was dramatic until they were 200 metres past Broadway and could no longer see landmarks. The first drift hit them at 7:02, 3 metres high, packed hard. Jarrett dropped the van into first gear and aimed for the centre where the snow might be softer. The Bedford hit the wall at 8 kilometres per hour. Snow exploded over the windscreen. The engine roared. The wheel spun, caught, spun again. The van lurched forward 2 metres, then stopped. Ted was out before his father said anything. He dug at the snow in front of the wheels with a grain shovel. Jarrett reversed 1 metre, then forward again. The van climbed. The drift compressed under the chassis. They broke through. 11 more drifts before Snowshill. Some they punched through with momentum, some they dug around. Twice they used the winch, anchoring to fence posts buried so deep they had to probe for them with a steel rod. The temperature was -7. The wind cut through 3 layers of wool. Ted's hands went numb after the 4th drift. Jarrett kept a rotation. 20 minutes digging, 10 minutes in the van with the heater running. They reached Snowshill at 10:50. 4 hours and 5 minutes for a journey that normally took 12 minutes. The village looked like a photograph printed in white. Only the church tower broke the snow line. Every house was buried to the eaves. Smoke rose from 3 chimneys. People had dug trenches from their front doors to the road, or where they thought the road was. The trenches were narrow, barely shoulder width. Some were already filling in again. Mary Hitchins, 67, was the first person to reach the van. She had been the postmistress before the snow. Now she was the unofficial coordinator of whatever Snowshill still had that resembled organisation. She took the bread without ceremony. 14 loaves for 14 households. The other families were either gone or managing on what they had. Jarrett asked about coal. Hitchin said most homes had a week left, maybe less. He asked about medical needs. She said Arthur Gibbs had a chest infection that was worsening. No one had seen Dr. Morrison from Broadway since February 3rd. The return journey took 3 hours. The drifts had not changed. The path they had carved was still there, already softening at the edges but passable. Jarrett drove in silence. Ted counted the drifts. Still 11. They made the run again on February 17th. The road was gone. Every metre they had cleared was filled in. New drifts had formed on top of old ones. The highest wall measured 4.8 metres. Jarrett stood in front of it with his shovel and did the mathematics. 2 men. 1 shovel each. 4.8 metres of compressed snow across a road width of 5 metres. 6 hours minimum, if the snow cooperated. They dug for 45 minutes before Jarrett accepted they could not do this alone. The Bedford turned around. They drove back to Broadway. Jarrett went directly to the council office. The clerk, a man named Simmons, who Jarrett had known since childhood, listened to the problem and explained the larger situation. Every road crew in Gloucestershire was working double shifts. The county had 14 functioning snowplows. 14. For 2,653 square kilometres of road network. Priority went to trunk routes and medical emergencies. Snowshill was neither. Jarrett asked what it would take to make it a priority. Simmons said a formal emergency declaration from the village. Jarrett pointed out the village had no telephone. Simmons agreed this was a problem. They sat in silence for 20 seconds. Then Simmons mentioned something about ex-military equipment. The US Army had left equipment at bases across England after the war ended. Some of it was being surplused through government channels. Some of it had simply been abandoned and quietly repurposed. Simmons had heard about a depot near Cheltenham with tracked vehicles. He could make a call, no promises. The call led to 3 more calls. By February 19th, Operation Snowdrift had a name and a plan. The plan involved 2 ex-US Army M29 Weasel tracked vehicles, requisitioned from Cheltenham Depot, 1 Caterpillar D7 tractor borrowed from a construction firm in Evesham, 47 volunteers from Broadway, Willasey and surrounding villages, 32 German prisoners of war from camps at Fladbury and Spring Hill, Charles Jarrett as guide. The M29 Weasel was designed for snow. American engineers had built it for Arctic operations and mountain warfare. Aluminum hull, tracks with aggressive tread, low ground pressure that let it float on powder snow, top speed of 58 km per hour on flat ground. In 4.5 metre Cotswold drifts, it could manage 3 km per hour while pushing snow aside like a blade. The Caterpillar D7 weighed 9 tons and had a bulldozer blade retrofitted to the front. It could not float on snow. It crushed it. February 21st, 1947. Operation Snowdrift began at first light. The convoy assembled in Broadway at 6:30. 2 Weasels in front, the Caterpillar behind them, 3 Bedford trucks carrying volunteers and tools, 1 smaller truck with the German POWs and their guards. The morning was clear, temperature -4, no wind. Perfect conditions, if any conditions, for moving 1,500 tons of snow could be called perfect. Jarrett rode in the lead Weasel. The driver was a former Royal Engineer named Cooper, who had trained on tracked vehicles in Norway during the war. He drove with mechanical precision, testing each drift before committing, reading the snow like terrain. The Weasel's tracks bit into the compressed surface. The hull rode up. The vehicle tilted at 30 degrees, then 40. Cooper held the throttle steady. The Weasel crested the drift and descended the far side. Behind them, the Caterpillar widened the path. The noise was constant. Engine roar, track clatter, snow compressing with sounds like breaking timber. The Caterpillar's blade caught the drift walls and sheared them at the base. Tons of snow collapsed into the cleared space. The volunteers followed with shovels, breaking up the largest chunks, pushing the debris to the sides. The German POWs worked without complaint. Most were from Wehrmacht labour battalions captured in France. They had been in British camps for 2 years. They shoveled snow in the Cotswolds the same way they had filled craters on bomb-damaged runways and cleared rubble in Coventry, methodically, efficiently. Some spoke a little English, most did not. The work needed no translation. By noon they had cleared 800 metres, 6 drifts. The largest had taken 90 minutes to cut through. Cooper stopped the weasel and walked back to inspect the path. It was 3.5 metres wide, enough for the Bedford van, barely. The walls on either side rose vertical. In some places they leaned inward, forming a tunnel. They ate lunch standing in the cleared corridor. Sandwiches, thermoses of tea. No one sat down. Sitting meant sinking into snow. The temperature was climbing towards 0. The snow surface was starting to soften. Afternoon work was slower. The warming snow stuck to the caterpillar blade. The weasel tracks through wet slush. The volunteers rotated in 20-minute shifts. The guards let the POWs take the same breaks. Everyone understood the physics. Wet snow was heavier. Heavier snow meant slower progress. Slower progress meant night work. They reached Snowshill at 1840. The village had heard them coming for an hour. The sound of the caterpillar carried across the snow-covered valley. People appeared from the trenches. 17 households, 43 people still in the village. They stood and watched the weasels roll down what used to be the high street. Mary Hitchens met them at the church. She had a list: coal requirements, medical needs, food stocks. The village had been rationing for 11 days. Several families were down to dried goods and root vegetables stored in cellars. Arthur Gibbs needed to see a doctor. His chest infection had developed into pneumonia. The convoy had brought coal, 1,200 weight loaded in the Bedford trucks, medical supplies from the Broadway surgery. Dr. Morrison himself had come, riding in one of the trucks despite being 68 and suffering from arthritis. He went directly to the Gibbs house. The unloading took 2 hours, coal distributed by household need. Gibbs received his allocation first, plus extra. Morrison examined him by lamplight and administered sulfanilamide from the surgery's reserve stock. He gave Gibbs a 60% chance of recovery. Without the medicine, perhaps 20%. The convoy could not stay. The path they had cut would start filling in by morning if the wind picked up. They needed to make return trips. Broadway had become the staging point for what was now recognised as a full emergency operation. The Ministry of Transport had formally authorised the use of military equipment. The County Council had allocated emergency funds. Operation Snowdrift was no longer improvised. It was official. February 22nd through March 5th became a pattern. Convoy out in the morning, clear the path. Deliver supplies, return before dark, sleep, repeat. The path never stayed clear. Snow fell on 6 of those 12 days. Wind filled in sections overnight. The caterpillar carved the same corridor 4 times. The volunteers worked in rotation. Some days 30 people, some days 50. The German POWs were there every day. They became efficient at the work. They learned which snow could be pushed and which had to be cut. They learned the weasel's rhythms. Cooper drove the lead weasel on every run. He developed an instinct for dangerous snow. Twice he detected instability in large drifts and routed around them. Once a drift collapsed as the convoy passed. No one was hurt, but the incident validated Cooper's caution. Charles Jarrett made every trip. He and Ted drove the Bedford van behind the caterpillar, delivering bread and supplies to individual houses. The village began to stabilise. Coal stocks rebuilt, food supplies improved. Dr. Morrison visited 3 more times. Arthur Gibbs recovered. The snow stopped falling on March 17th. The 55-day sequence ended the same way it began. No warning, no gradual decrease. The weather patterns simply shifted. The Scandinavian anticyclone moved east. Warmer Atlantic air moved in. Temperatures climbed above freezing. The snow began to melt. The melt brought different problems. Flooding, roof collapses from wet snow load. Roads turned to mud. But these were problems that conventional resources could handle. The emergency was over. Operation Snowdrift made its final run on March 19th. The path was still there, now carved 2 meters deep into snowbanks that were settling and shrinking. The weasels drove through easily. The caterpillar was no longer needed. The convoy consisted of 2 vehicles and a handful of volunteers. They delivered the last supplies to Snowshill. Mary Hitchens met them with tea and cake baked that morning in a kitchen that finally had enough coal for luxuries. She thanked them formally. The village had voted to commission a plaque. It would be mounted in the church. It would list every person who participated in Operation Snowdrift, including the German POWs, including Charles Jarrett and his son Ted. The official record of Operation Snowdrift lists 1,538 tons of snow removed from the Broadway Snowshill corridor between February 21st and March 19th, 1947. The number is precise because the County Council measured the cleared volume for cost accounting purposes. The operation cost £847 in fuel, equipment rental, and wages. The Ministry of Transport reimbursed £620. The remainder was funded by local subscription. 14 households in Snowshill survived the winter because of that operation. Arthur Gibbs lived another 16 years. Cooper returned to civilian engineering work and later consulted on snow removal equipment design. The two Weasels were returned to Cheltenham Depot and eventually sold as surplus. One ended up in a farm equipment museum in Yorkshire. The Caterpillar D7 continued working construction jobs until 1963. The German POWs were repatriated between 1947 and 1948. None are known to have returned to Snowshill, but several sent letters to the village in subsequent years. Mary Hitchins kept the letters. They are now in the Gloucestershire archives. Most simply said, thank you. Charles Jarrett continued his bakery route until 1959. He never stopped delivering to Snowshill. The road was cleared every winter after 1947. Never again did it close for more than 2 days. The County Council established new protocols for rural emergency access. Those protocols traced directly to lessons learned during Operation Snowdrift. Priority rankings changed, equipment requirements changed, coordination between councils improved. The plaque in Snowshill Church was dedicated on June 8, 1947. It is still there, bronze, mounted on the south wall. It lists 83 names, 47 British volunteers, 32 German POWs, Charles and Ted Jarrett, Cooper, Dr. Morrison, Mary Hitchins. The inscription reads, "In recognition of those who ensured Snowshill endured the winter of 1947. Ted Jarrett was present at the dedication. His father was not. Charles had died on May 23rd. Heart attack. The doctor said it was quick. The village turned out for the funeral. They filled the church in Broadway. They brought flowers. They brought bread." The winter of 1947 broke records that still stand. Coldest February in British history. Longest continuous snowfall. Greatest economic disruption since the war. But in Snowshill, it is remembered for something else. For a baker who refused to wait for permission. For volunteers who worked until the job was done. For German prisoners who dug out a British village because it needed digging out. For 2 weeks when silence was broken by the sound of a Bedford van and tracked vehicles punching through 4.5 metres of snow. The archive files contain one final detail. On March 20th, 1947, the day after the last convoy, Ted Jarrett drove to Snowshill alone. He parked the Bedford van in the same spot where his father had delivered bread on February 14th. He walked to each of the 14 houses. He delivered fresh loaves. He accepted no payment. When asked why, he said it was what his father would have wanted. The bread was still warm,